This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the back Zurhaar, he backs it, he kicks it, all the four from Zurhaar. This is the speed of the culture. 3 bounces down the wing, he keeps going, 4 bounces. Joining the chorus, the Can't Lose Kangas, AFLW premiers.
Hello, welcome back once again to North Pod, and we're reacting to another loss. We're down to 1-4 now from the first 5 games, and I think, it's hard to know how to feel about that. Another game with a second half drop off. Another game that we weren't expected to win and that we were in, and then we find ourselves well out of the game by the end of it. So I know there are a lot of emotions, particularly that last quarter was pretty disappointing, but I think we've got to stay a bit realistic and go, sure, that's a disappointing loss, but the Suns were a good team, so we'll talk all about it. I've had quite the social calendar recently. I had my brother's wedding on the same day, so again, did watch this game the next day. Here's to clear footy schedules for the rest of the season. I say, it's been it's been a difficult couple of weeks just with my timetable to watch the games and then also get my thoughts out there. So this one is probably a little bit later than I would have liked, but you got to do what you got to do. I've had now 2 North Melbourne supporters find a way to put their weddings on a North Melbourne day, match day. So maybe there's some good omens there. Maybe it's trying to help me avoid having to sit through a loss. I'm not too sure. Anyway, let's move past that and let's jump into the review. So a bit to unpack here with team selection this week. There was a statement made, one particularly large statement, I think, with the dropping of Bailey Scott, who, had not had a good start to the year, don't get me wrong, but probably I wouldn't have thought was, our worst. However, I like the selection integrity. I like the fact that we're saying, all right, you're not quite performing to the standards that we require. Let's try someone else in your spot. I love that. So Bailey Scott omitted alongside Matt Whitlock and Robert Hansen Jr. I think Whitlock was more of a team balance thing. We went pretty tall in the back line last week. Didn't work for us. So I've got no doubt he'll be back this year. A bit of a tough one to bring him in, play 2.5 quarters, sub him out, and then drop him for the next week. But I just don't think team balance wise it made sense. I think the time to experiment with him would have been when Griffin Logue was out of the side. In any case, he was out, and then Robert Hansen Jr. also dropped, which I think a little bit rough on him. I thought he started the season pretty well, but then when Dylan Stephens has come in, has kind of taken up that wing time for him, and unfortunately, he just hasn't been able to have that impact in the front half of the ground. So again, I sort of see it as good selection integrity, similar to that Bailey Scott one. We want to try different players. So those 3 were dropped. Riley Hardiman retained his place as the sub. Would have loved to see him get a full game, but I understand, again, there are team balance considerations there. Coming in, Finn O'Sullivan was back, just had some illness last week, so he was always going to come back in if he was fit. And then the 2, I guess, more surprising inclusions. Zach Fisher came in, I guess you could look at it as him replacing Matt Whitlock. So a tall for a small there and someone that can distribute the footy. Zach Fisher, we saw him do that last year quite a bit. And Zane Dersma replacing Robert Hansen Jr. in the forward half of the ground. And an interesting selection. I don't know that either. Well, no, it's not fair actually. Zach Fisher did have a good first half of the year. Zach Fisher did have a good first game in the VFL, but then did a bit of an injury and didn't play last week. Zane Dersma, similarly, I don't know, was kicking goals or he wasn't breaking down the door in VFL, but I think a player of his talent, you want to get him in, and he had a pretty solid game after a clumsy start. So that's, I guess, the changes that we made there. I don't mind it. I like the fact that we're trying some different things. If you're not winning games, you do want to see some changes made, and I think a lot of that made on paper it made sense. We need to get another distributor in there to help out Caleb Daniel, and Zach Fisher can do that. And I think in theory that makes for a better team balance. And then, like I mentioned, Riley Hardeman, the sub, would have loved to get him a full game. However, last week he did play the quarter a bit, and then played VFL the next day. No VFL this week, so he couldn't do that. But at least last week he was still getting the miles in the legs. And when he did come in the last quarter, I thought he did a couple of good things. So we'll touch on that. In terms of the match result, it was a loss, like I alluded to. North Melbourne 13-11-89, defeated by the Suns. 21-15, 141. A pretty high scoring game there. You can see 36 scoring shots for the Suns and 24 for us. So a 52-point loss. A pretty windy day. The wind was blowing towards the pocket, so not a straightforward, automatically easier time with the wind, but certainly there was an end that it was easier to score towards. We kicked with that in the first quarter and the third quarter, and certainly those quarters we were able to get the ball in our forward 50. But I think holistically the Suns did do a better job of utilising the wind. I thought, particularly goal kicking with the wind, it was, like I mentioned, a bit of a tricky one because it was going towards a pocket, so you did still have to, particularly if you're kicking from not directly in front, you'd have to target a goalpost and let the wind do a bit for you. And I thought the Suns managed that better. In terms of getting out of the blocks, I thought we actually were pretty involved early. Jai Simpkin was really strong early, kicked our first goal and was winning some hard balls, shooting out some handballs. I thought he really set the tempo and the expectations of the side nice and early. I thought he was fantastic. Paul Curtis and Zurhaar got some early smothers, applied some forward half pressure early on. And, looking at what was happening early on, I think you'd be forgiven for thinking that we'd come to play, as the classic saying goes. As always, it sort of diminished from there. Our pressure really dropped off in that first half. As always, there's an awful passage that kind of makes the rest of the team drop their heads a little. It was in that first quarter, Jack Darling gave away a free kick in the ruck. Didn't need to do it. From that ensuing free kick, the ball sent deep inside 50. There's a bit of a scrimmage, and Aiden Core ends up with the ball maybe 25 metres out in the pocket, decides to kick a cross goal, pretty dangerous kick, gives away the footy. It ends up as a bit of a contest. There's a scrap, and Paul, so that we've got two mistakes there. And then mistake number 3, Tommy Powell just needed to go for the footy. And for whatever reason, he almost backed away from it. It was like he was waiting for someone else to go and get it. The Suns gathered it, had way too much time, way more time than they should have had. Fortunately for us, they snapped and hit the post. But I think, for me, that passage was a bit of an ominous sign for elements of the game that were to come. A pretty common theme started to develop, and that was just that the Suns would kick long to a contest. Ben King or Jed Walter would, either mark it or bring the ball to ground. And then at ground level, the Suns smalls just always were in the right spots. Always. Ned Long, Flanders, Weller, Rogers, all of them were dangerous, but it was a real team effort from the Suns, and we just didn't have any answers for their mids and their smaller forwards. They just always consistently knew where to be. They worked harder than our mids and defenders, and that was really where the damage was done. It was virtually, obviously it wasn't every time, but it felt like every time the ball went to ground inside forward 50 for the Suns, one of their mids or small forwards would grab it on the run, find some space, evade a tackler, and score. So that was really where the game was won and lost. At the other end, we saw Fisher taking some kick-ins, so it wasn't all up to Caleb Daniel, which was nice. I thought there was a bit more of a balance in terms of the way that we were distributing it when we did get it in our back half. But we also saw some pretty typical errors here in the first quarter. Paul Curtis gave away a downfield free kick. Zane Dersma, I mentioned, had a really nervous moment early on, dropping one that he should have taken easily above his head. And we saw the painted to Charlie Comben. He gambled off King, ran up to try and make a contest, but just didn't make enough of an impact. The ball didn't get out of bounds or wasn't intercept marked, and that allowed Ben King just to get one of the easiest goals at AFL level that he'll ever get over the back. almost had too much time. So he took the mark just outside the goal square and waltzed in for a goal. So we certainly had those mistakes that we're used to seeing. We squandered some opportunities too, but I think holistically we deserved to go into quarter time about 2 goals down. We had kicked plenty of points, so part of it is that where we just not taking advantage of the opportunities that we got, but we certainly gave the Suns plenty of opportunities as well. So the first quarter, I think, we wasted what we had with the wind, but I thought holistically we got what we deserved. In terms of the second quarter, it was probably our best. You could see immediately, though, the Suns were kicking with the wind better, like I mentioned off the top. Our best passage definitely came in this quarter. It was from the back half. Fisher set off a really nice kick to Dylan Stevens, sort of on the half back flank. He then hit Sheezel with a really nice option. Again, a precision kick to Luke Parker, and then finally a precision kick to Nick Larkey. So all precise kicks down the near side. Larkey kicks the goal, and that was a real win for us. It was great to see that we can actually precisely transition the footy. In terms of the second quarter as a whole, we kicked 4 goals to 3. So we were on top, but it was a seesawing second quarter. It wasn't all going our way. We saw Darling and Fisher, I think, probably playing their role in this quarter. Darling was a really good hit-up option up the ground and was actually playing quite well in the ruck, particularly when matched up against the Suns' second ruck. And we saw Fisher able to come in and distribute, and like I mentioned that play earlier, he started that with a nice kick. It wasn't a super difficult kick, but it was a kick that a lot of the players in our side wouldn't be able to make. So we saw that happening. Zane Dersmer also got involved after essentially being unsighted in the first quarter, except for that error. He kicked one of his 2 goals in this quarter as well and started to find the footy. So I think watching the second quarter, what I saw at least was we steadied. We were able to actually turn some of our opportunities into goals, and we were able to at least slow the Suns down. We certainly didn't stop them, but we were able to get some ascendancy and control parts of the game during this quarter. Only 8 points down at halftime, so some optimism going into halftime. I thought definitely an opportunity to go on with the game, and again, similar to the week prior, although the game against Sydney we were further behind at halftime. I think you go in going, okay, look, maybe we're not going to win the game, but we're going to take something out of it. Because I certainly thought that second quarter we showed some promise. And honestly, it continued through the start of the third quarter as well. We kicked the first 3 goals of the quarter, and halfway through, you'd think, you'd probably like our chances of winning. We saw, unfortunately, though, the best and the worst of us during this quarter. And it was just, some of the stuff that we've seen so many times before from a variety of plays. McKercher went on a really nice run down the wing, maybe took 3 or 4 bounces, only to be presented with nothing up the ground. Like, he just didn't have any options other than a long down the line to no one. He ends up giving a hospital hand pass over the top to Zurhaar, which ended in a turnover. So, just a nice, beautiful run, but then through lack of options and I guess lack of capacity to make a good decision, we end up turning it over. That being said, so there's an example of the negatives, but on the other hand, we did see some real surety and clean decision making. Jacob Gidstani assessed the options and hit a nice shorter pass to Nick Larkey, who did the same, sort of took his time and hit up Dersmer to kick his second. It's that kind of decision making that we want to see more consistently. We want to see less of that long bombing to a contest or to an outnumber at times, and more of this precise ball movement. I think we look our best when we take the game on, not with massive risk, but certainly with backing in our kicking, even though I don't necessarily think that we have a right to believe in our kicking at this point. I think in general that's really the only way that we're able to control the game or control the footy. We're not able to take much ground very often with those kicks to contests. So we saw that. Unfortunately, the end of the third quarter, just red time goals for the Suns. They kicked 2 very late goals, including Rao pretty much kicking one on the siren, which came off the back of about 6 broken tackles. It was quintessential North Melbourne football in that third quarter, and I'm sure there was some fatigue setting in. It was a hot day, end of the third quarter. You do expect some fatigue, but just too many broken tackles there. There was so many opportunities to stop that goal, and we just weren't able to do it. And all of a sudden, the Suns are back out to 19-point leaders at 3/4 time. And whilst the game's not completely put to bed, it certainly made our life more difficult going into 3/4 time. We saw Hardiman replace McKercher, and then, I think the last quarter, if you've watched any of it, 2-7 does tell the story. It was a bit of an avalanche. The ground balls inside 50 continued to just, be shocking for us. We weren't able to do what was required of us there. Unfortunately, there was a moment early in the quarter where Simpkin won a free kick in the middle of the ground, took his time, and then inexplicably just had his kick smothered. It went up the other end for a goal, and that was a real backbreaker. It's unfortunate because I thought that he had a really good game to that point, but unfortunately, that kind of mistake really, I think it swung the momentum heavily towards the Suns. I don't think we were going to win, without that, but I think it would have been a more competitive final score had that not happened, because you could just see our heads dropped. Simpkin's head dropped, and the rest of the players around him, their heads also dropped, and we've just conceded too many goals in that last quarter to be any kind of chance. We saw Hardiman come in and I thought did a couple of nice things, including a really nice, brilliant one-on-one win at half forward, and then a nice deep kick to Jack Darling, who kicked his second for the game. That was a nice highlight for Hardiman in that last quarter. And then we saw a little bit of experimentation from the coach's box. Griffin Logue into the ruck for a little bit at the end. We saw Chom go forward, mostly I think as a result of the fact that Jed Walter, one of the Suns' key forwards, was subbed out, so we were a bit tall down back. So it made sense for us to shift Chom forward and just see if he could provide anything. He wasn't, he didn't have a lot of time forward, so hard to judge his output, but he did take a nice outlet mark at one point. Ultimately, though, that was just a bit of dead time fiddling around. It wasn't really enough to give us a sense for whether or not that's something that we try long term, or particularly the Logue and the ruck. That's something we haven't really seen before. He's certainly an undersized ruck, but so is Jack Darling. So I can see value to just having a bit of an experiment and seeing if you can get anything out of that. Unfortunately, just an embarrassing way to win the game. After some positive signs, not amazing signs, but I thought some positive signs throughout the rest of the game. To lose by 52 is tough, because for periods we were looking good. There were periods where I thought we were really on top and had momentum, and at times took our chances, but certainly in that first quarter had more chances that we should have taken and given ourselves a bit more of a lead, or any lead at all at quarter time. Holistically, an inconsistent performance. I think it's important to remember that the Suns are a good side. A few weeks ago, I wasn't sure if Adelaide are a good side, and I think that's been proven. I don't think they're a bad side, but I don't think they're a top 2 side. And since we played them, they've lost the next couple of games. So potentially they're not an elite team. I think the Suns very well could be a very good side this year. So you have to keep that in mind. But when you lose by 52, having been up in the third quarter and looking really good, it's a disappointing way to end the game. And I think that's where some of the criticism of our demons in terms of not knowing how to win, I think are probably justified, because we were in a position to compete in this game and just threw it away with our lack of capacity to defend inside 50. Let's go to story of the game, and I think I've kind of spoken about it a couple of times during the review segment. It was ground balls inside 50 that let us down. It's a different way for us to lose. We've had issues with sides sort of kicking us to death and picking apart our defence and slicing us up. We've seen that. We've also definitely had games where we've done all the hard work in terms of losing it. We've just turned the ball over in awful positions and cost ourselves turnover goal after turnover goal. This wasn't that game. We still had that smattering of turnovers, and there were still times where the Gold Coast would kick, seemingly kick to uncontested marks the whole way down the ground. But I think that the part of us, or the part of the game where we absolutely lost it, was undoubtedly when the ball hit the ground inside defensive 50. We just had an inability to defend. Our midfielders and our small, medium defenders just did not work hard enough, and we're outsmarted. I thought by and large our tall defenders did a pretty good job aerially in terms of spoiling and getting the ball to ground. That's their job. Chom can come across and intercept mark, which he did a little bit. But, generally speaking, a contest was made, and if it wasn't marked, the Suns would kick a goal. And I thought they were just working harder and smarter to be in those right spots, or flat out, or just evade the would-be tacklers far too easily. I thought that was a real concern in our defence. I wouldn't put it down to any one player, but the likes of McDonald, Tucker, Finn O'Sullivan, Fisher, and Caleb Daniel. They're those defensive types that you'd expect to be, corralling and stopping their offensive players from being damaging at ground level. And then obviously the mids, like I've talked about, LDU, Powell, Sheezel, these types, Simpkin, when their midfielders are going forward on them, it's on them to make sure they're corralling and stopping that from happening. Like Tuke Miller went to LDU in the second half and did a lot of damage off the back of, matching up at him at stoppage and then run off him. Not the first and probably won't be the last time that we have players go to an LDU or a Sheezel and try to work off them. But Tuke Miller was a good example of that, and he's a really good midfielder, to be clear. But that, I think, is where the game was lost. We just weren't able to compete when the ball hit the ground. Ben King kicked 5 goals, but he took literally every opportunity that he had. He had 5 goals from 6 touches. He took a couple of marks, had a couple of free kicks, 4, and that's all of his goals. And so he's a fantastic target. He's taller than any of our defenders. A bit of a musical chairs scenario with Charlie Combat and Griffin Logue and Aiden Core in terms of who the primary matchup was down there. But, I thought holistically we didn't play a bad game on him. He just took every opportunity that he could. I thought that Core was hard done by a couple of times with free kicks against. I mentioned the mistake that Chom made where he tried to come up and make a contest. At least that's a proactive mistake. So even though, it looks like he was super damaging, and he was to an extent, it was the ability for King to make a contest that brought the smalls into the game. And Ben Long's that interesting size where he's a sort of like a Zurhaar or a Paul Curtis. He can play small, he can play tall. He kicked 3 as well and was super damaging as that kind of hybrid player. So the damage was done at ground level, no doubt, and very easily so. Like, that's the concern for me. It wasn't like they were doing miraculous things to kick these goals. At times they were just waltzing through. The consistent thread here is that our mids, generally speaking, don't work hard enough to defend. Whether or not that's when the ball's inside defensive 50, or if it means that the opposition's cutting us up with their kicking, one way or another, like, our whole ground defence is not working. And so that, I think, for me is the concern. Whilst this was a slightly different version of losing because of poor defence, it's kind of the same. It's just happening in a different part of the ground. We're used to it happening through the middle part of the ground, along the wing or through the corridor. In this game, it was just happening inside defensive 50. And you can point the finger of blame at, I think, the whole team holistically. But structurally, I think it's probably getting to a point where I'd be expecting the coach's box to be trying some different things, because whatever we're trying, we seem to give up far too many uncontested marks when the opposition team is in transition. And in this instance, there just seemed to be no structure when the ball hit the ground. So whether or not that's players not following instructions, or whether or not that's the structure just not holding up, one way or another, there was just so many options for the Suns to kick a goal. The Suns had 14 different goal scorers. They had a couple more that kicked behind. It tells you that the mids and the halfbacks are getting it on the fun. It's not just those 6 or 7 forwards. So in a way, it's nice to lose in a different way, but I think in a more realistic and a more reflective way, it's a bit concerning that this is another deficiency that's been highlighted and so alarmingly for us. So I've got no doubt that the coaching group will go to work on, how we were beaten in this area. There's definitely some easier things to fix up than others. I think the decision making of Chom is something you can keep coaching, but the body positioning of our players and the work rate of our players, particularly when the ball's turned over, you just have to be able to get back at this point. We're not a good enough side to be just downhill skiers. You kind of, as a midfielder, have to have half an eye to where your opposition mid is. You can't run forward and then drop your head when the ball gets turned over, because we know it's going to happen. So for me, that's the most concerning part. Is we've found a different way to lose, and no doubt, other sides, when they're scouting us, have found another way to win. All right, Shinboner of the week and the North Podium votes. Bit of a different one this week for Shinboner of the week. I thought Cam Zurhaar had one of those games where just really struggled to find the footy. He struggled to get himself involved. Didn't have a high numbers game. I'll read off his stats in a minute, but I thought he just tried his guts out. And, if we're talking about the word Shinboner, I thought he went hard every time that it was his time to go and made the most of those few opportunities that he did get. In terms of the stats, kicked a goal, 9 touches, 4 tackles, 2 of them inside 50, a goal assist, 3 inside 50s. So numbers that don't jump off the page, but it's a work rate thing and it's an opportunistic, you go when it's your time to go. I mentioned earlier that Colby McKercher had that hospital hand pass over the top to him. He knew he was going to get hurt. It was going to be a big hit, but he went anyway and at least made the contest, tried to retain possession for us. I thought he was playing fairly high up the ground at times, so he was providing a bit of an outlet or a contest where needed. He had a nice smother early on, which I mentioned off the top. And I think his goal is a real testament to the fact that he was opportunistic. It was really cleverly crumbed, picked it up really quickly and snapped really fast as well. So it had to be a quick gather. He had to know where the goals were. He turned around and snapped it. And that's exactly what you need from your half forwards. I think a lot of the time we're guilty of overhandballing it inside 50 because we want to get a really clean chance. But what we saw here was Zurhaar just going, great, I've got the ball, I'm putting it straight up my boot. I'm not giving anyone a chance to tackle me. And I know I can make the distance from here, so I'm going for it. So for me, that is Shinboner stuff. It probably wasn't going his way. It's not one where he's going to get a Brownlow vote at all, but you want to see your half forwards working as hard as Zurhaar was in this game. So for me, he's Shinboner of the week, the epitome of giving it your all. In terms of the rest of the voting, I mean, based on the fact it's a 8 or 9 goal loss, there's not going to be 3s and 4s. No, I don't think anyone was worthy of a 4 or a 3 in this game. So I've just got some 2s and 1s. I've got 2 players that get the 2 votes. Jai Simpkin is probably the one that would have gotten 3 if it was not for that glaring error in the last quarter. I thought besides that, he had a really solid game. 24 touches, 2 goals, 6 marks, 1 of them contested, 4 tackles, 3 clearances, 4 inside 50s. And I thought, started really strongly, kicked the goal early and also kicked one of our last goals. His error, like I mentioned, dragged him down, but putting that aside, I thought he had a really nice, even performance, kicked it well, which is something that's not normally necessarily his strong suit. And I thought, played a captain's game, as it were. I thought he was in the trenches early on, set the tone, and like I mentioned, was looking for the good options, didn't butcher the footy like he has in the past. Unfortunately, you just can't walk past that deflating moment. So I think a 2-vote game being a good game, brought down from a great. And my other 2-vote getter, LDU, 26 disposals, 7 marks, 4 tackles, 8 clearances, 564 metres gained, which was a team high, had a goal assist and 8 inside 50s. Unfortunately, kicked 3 points, no goals. So, again, if he kicks 1 or 2 of those goals, maybe he's up to a 3. But still a really nice game from him. I thought his clearance work was particularly special in this game. It was, it wasn't just 1 or 2 bursts away. Of his 8 clearances, I think probably 6 or 7 of them were ones where he was able to burst away and actually have a look before he kicked it, which is, sometimes something that you could point the finger at him and say, let's have a look before we kick. An otherwise very even performance from him, I thought, similar to Simpkin. I think quarter to quarter he contributed, and if he was able to kick one of those goals early, it's maybe a different story for him. But off the back of signing that big deal, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast, I thought this was a promising performance. One of his better games for the year. Not his best, but certainly one of his better games of the 5 so far. So 2 to Simpkin, 2 to LDU, and then some 1 voters here. I think Cam Zurhaar played his role as best as he could in this game, so I've given him the 1 vote, and I mentioned his stats and his game before. Harry Sheezel, 1 vote, kicked a goal, 27 touches, 4 marks, 4 tackles. I think, like I sort of said with Zurhaar, played his role, had a high-ish numbers game, but I think unlike last week, probably his impact was limited a little bit. Didn't play behind the footy as much as he did the previous week, and so probably wasn't able to deliver on that impact. But I think if we're talking about one as being someone with a real highlight play or someone that has played their role without doing too much else, I think that's Harry Sheezel. He played his role. Similarly, Caleb Daniel played his role, 32 disposals, 6 clearances, which is a high number of clearances for him, 88% disposal effectiveness. Just did his job at halfback, didn't break the game open, didn't create a myriad of opportunities for us to break the lines, but did his absolute best to distribute to get us out of defensive 50. And then, like I mentioned, had the 6 clearances, so moved up to stoppages when they were around the ground and was able to help us, get the ball out of those tight spots. So I think it would be hard to say that he didn't play his role. Dylan Stephens is another one that I think he impressed me, to be honest, playing on that wing. I thought this was possibly his best full game of footy for us. Ran the right patterns, got into some good spots, had 21 disposals, 7 marks, 3 tackles, a goal assist. And yeah, I guess in Bailey Scott's absence, I thought he really stepped up and was probably our best wingman, or definitely our best wingman, given he's the only wingman in the votes. He's one that I've probably been a little bit down on, so this was a promising game. Like, it's 1 vote, so it's not a game-breaking game. It's not one that I go, all right, let's lock him into the wing all year. But I do think if he was able to provide this kind of game consistently, then I think he plays every week. Unfortunately, we haven't seen this kind of thing from him with any level of consistency last year. So a good game from Dylan Stephens. He earned the 1 vote. Jack Darling is another one I've given 1 vote. 2 goals, 16 disposals, 5 marks, 1 of them contested, 4 tackles. And I mentioned him earlier, just provided an optional game, kicked his 2 handy goals. The fact that he's that big bullocking target and is also able to go into the ruck and was relatively crafty in the ruck as well. He was really giving it to Ethan Reid, who I think is in his 3rd game. So whilst Reid's certainly larger, I think he's got a fair bit to learn about the ruck craft. He did give away a free kick, Jack Darling, earlier on in the piece, which I spoke about. But besides that, I thought had a pretty faultless game. Did what he could. It's always handy for your second forwards bobbing up for a couple of goals. So yeah, I thought he played his role. Paul Curtis, very similar. 2 goals, 14 touches, 3 marks, 4 tackles, 3 clearances. Did what he could as a small forward. Probably could have been a little bit tidier with his disposal, but I don't think wasn't bad by any means, so worth the 1 vote. And finally, Finn O'Sullivan, 15 disposals, 3 tackles, 4 inside 50s. Continued to be that linking option through half-back in the centre of the ground. Showed his evasiveness. Was super impressed with his return after being ill last week. So his 2nd game out of 4 that he's collected a vote. And I think, we're continuing to see some of those really promising signs from a really high draft pick. You just hope that this year he finds his feet at AFL level. He kind of establishes what he's able to do, and then next year we can see how we can evolve that, how to best deploy him for the team. Because right now he's kind of spending most of his time at halfback and then the occasional bit on the wing. And I think holistically, longer term he's going to end up in the middle, I would think, with maybe some time on the wing. But in terms of his development, he's learning some really good defensive craft and capabilities right now off halfback, and it is working for the team because we just need as many kickers behind the ball as we can get. So there's the votes: 2 to Simpkin, 2 to LDU, 1 to Zurhaar, Sheezel, Daniel Stephens, Darling, Curtis, and Finn O'Sullivan. Nick Larkey was close. I just would have liked him to run under the footy a little bit less. So I'll speak about him, and it was tough for the tall defenders, because when Ben King kicks 5, and the forward line in general for the Suns is playing so well, it's tough to find votes for those tall defenders on the back of that. But I don't think they were totally put to shame. Core and Logue, I thought they were solid. Chom's similar, like he was solid, but just would have liked a little bit more from him. He did take a few intercept marks, but just not enough for me to absolutely sing his praises. So that is the votes from this game. In terms of what the current standings are looking like, we've got 2 out on top at the moment. Harry Sheezel and Jai Simpkin are both on 7 votes, so they're sitting atop the North Podium as it stands. We've got a 3-way tie for second: Tom Powell, Nick Larkey, and Luke Davies-Uniacke. And then a 2-way tie for third with Luke McDonald and Paul Curtis on 5 votes. Sherry, McKercher, and Darling on 4 votes behind them. So that's what the top of the podium looks like at the moment. We're starting to see those top few take shape. And I think for me, this is probably a fairer representation of my voting that I did last year, just because of the spread of vote getters I'm able to do with this. So I think it's, Tom Powell's up there on the back of a really good game and another solid game, whereas someone like Sheezel has been more consistent. He's voted, I think he's polled in 4 out of 5 games, but he hasn't burst away and had an absolute breakout performance, hence he's only on 7 votes at the moment. So that's where it sits. Let's jump to the next part. As always, just like to jump in here and say thank you for supporting the show and supporting NorthPod. I'd really appreciate if you could share the podcast out with any North fans that you know, subscribe on your chosen podcast service, and get involved with the show on social media, X, Blue Sky, Instagram. I'm at NorthPod Show. You can also support the show with the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. It's just an additional way to help me keep the show going. I'd like to thank, and I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Anthony Agoni, is how I'm going to guess it's pronounced, for a few coffees bought during the week. Really appreciate it. And thanks so much for everyone's support, just for being a listener. It means so much. Kanga clipboard time. This is where we just run through a few of the other stray thoughts from the game. I think Nick Larkey, I alluded to before, him overrunning the football, particularly when we were kicking with the wind. And I think it's a bit of a combination between him overrunning it and players kicking over his head. It's column A, it's column B, but either way, we needed to adjust that in general. He was still able to kick 2 goals too from the ball that he was able to get, but you'd like to get more out of his talents, and I think that he didn't help himself. He definitely could have led a bit smarter and found himself in better positions. By the same token, I think there was just a bit of a lack of connection between the players up the ground and him in this game. It's nothing that concerns me long term. We know that he's a fantastic reader of the footy, and it's barely a blip, like he's kicked 2 goals too. He'd still be very close to it in the Coleman. Let me check that here. Yeah, so he's currently sitting 4th, or I guess equal 3rd in the Coleman. Ben King and Josh Tracy have 17 goals. Fogarty and Nick Larkey have 16 goals. So, still having a really nice season in front of goal. Was able to kick 2 in a game where he was finding it pretty difficult, but you just like to see a bit of an adjustment after quarter time. When the ball was kicked over his head so many times, let's adjust. You've got to account for the wind. I know it's a tricky, swirly wind, but we can't keep kicking it over him. And by the same token, you've got to learn in that scenario then to hold your lead a little bit. Even if it means you're going to be trying to take a contested mark rather than getting out in front, maybe you go for... I always associate this with Jared Ruffhead. He's certainly not the only player to do it, but I think of it, you sort of make your lead, and then just before you're about to jump at it, you slow down there, try and make some body contact, so you kind of put a buffer between you and your defender, and then try and launch forward again. It's tough to do. It's really tough to do, but that's something that the best key forwards in the league can do, is can create space sort of when there is none. You've got to do that through changing your pace, particularly if you're not a super, super fast leader. But in a game like this where the ball is going to be coming to you pretty quick, you don't want it going over your head. So you've got to try some different things. I guess just a note from this game, Larkey probably wouldn't be happy with the way that he led, but I think the forwards could kick it to him and the mids could kick it to him better. A note here around the defensive mix. So I spoke in team selection that I think, in theory, bringing in another distributor is something that we need. Having Fisher down back definitely helped in terms of distribution. I think we're able to get the ball out of our defensive 50 a little easier than we have been able to in the past. So I think that's a tick. Unfortunately, though, I do think it probably came at our expense on the defensive end, because as I've mentioned throughout the pod, we just weren't able to defend when the ball hit the ground inside defensive 50. So it's a tough one, because having Caleb Daniel, Zach Fisher and Finn O'Sullivan that can all take the game on back down in defence, I think is helpful. But, Daniel tries his best to defend, but he's small. He has his limitations, but I think at least he tries. Foss is playing his 4th game, so you can't expect too much from him. And Fisher, I think we saw last year, he's going to be outpointed one-on-one defensively. So it's probably one too many defensive liabilities. I mean, even Darcy Tucker and Luke McDonald, they can roost the footy and they can kick it, but I wouldn't say Tucker is an amazing defender. I think Luke McDonald's pretty good, and he's having a good year so far, but there's a lot of players down there that you wouldn't bet your life on them in a 1v1 contest. And McKercher, who sometimes plays some halfback as well, is probably pretty similar. He's more of a distributor, more of a offensively minded player. So it's interesting when you go through those names and you consider, who's rolling through there. but in previous weeks, it's really only been Caleb Daniel that's been doing the primary distributing. I guess to me, it's like we've got to find the right mix because this defensively wasn't it. The ball just, as soon as it hit the ground, the Suns were all over us. Therefore, to me, we mustn't have enough defensively minded players in there in that mix. I guess when Archer returns, which is hopefully this coming week, that helps. But then you got to question who's he going to replace. Does he replace someone like Tucker, who I thought's been solid this year? It's been hard to knock his games this year. Luke McDonald's not going to get dropped. He's playing fantastic footy. So then do you take Fisher straight back out, having seen that he can have an offensive impact? It's tough. And then Riley Hardiman's one that I do want to get in, and I think he is at the perfect balance. He's going to be a really nice defender, but also has some really good distribution. So I think if we want to look at the positive side, there's definitely still things that we can experiment with down back, but yeah, you would like to see us a little bit more assured in defence because, yeah, just some horrible defensive plays in general. And it's not just the defenders, I get that. It's the mids as well. It's the team effort, but you've got to have players down there that can defend. And I'm just not sure that the mix was right in this game defensively, even if it was a better look for us offensively. I don't know where the balance is there. And maybe, to be honest, Riley Hardiman unlocks that balance because he's able to do both. But if he's in there, I just don't think that we're playing Daniel and Fisher. I suspect that Fisher is out if Hardiman plays a full game. The clearance game was something that faded as the match went on. We tend to go as well as our clearance game goes, and thus the last quarter was a blowout. Our clearance work in the last quarter wasn't good. We ended up losing the clearances 42-45, so it's pretty standard, pretty even. But when we were in the game, we were ahead in the clearances. I think that's pretty clear and pretty obvious. When we were playing well, we were winning the ball at the coalface. We need to continue to find ways to maximise value for clearances because, again, this is a game where we were pretty even or we were on top for large periods with the clearances, but the inside 50 count didn't match it. We lost that 47-65. So it's going to be pretty hard to win games when you're losing the inside 50 count by 18. Our efficiency inside 50 wasn't bad. It was pretty similar to the Suns, but they just went in more often and were able to therefore score more often. So yeah, I think the clearance that's the defensive setup at the clearances that's still a bit of a concern for me. When we don't win it, we allow the opposition team out the front of the clearance far too often. That is where a more defensively minded midfielder like Will Phillips would be helpful. But again, it's how you get him into the team. If it's at the expense of Tom Powell, for example, do you rob Peter to pay Paul? I mean, Tom Powell's had a good first two games, but since then I think has been a little bit more disappointing. So it's tough to make those decisions, but I guess that's a match committee. You have to decide what you're willing to live with. And I think at the moment, our clearance game this year has been a little bit haphazard. It's not been as good as I would like, and I think in particular it's the way that we get beaten at stoppage. It's the sort of thing that you would hope bringing Luke Parker across could somewhat solve, and I think in some scenarios it has, but it certainly hasn't been a quick fix. There's definitely still some work to do in terms of our clearance game. I think more holistically looking at the way that we're going, we're 5 games in now. We're about where I thought we would be. That early win against the D's was super handy, but we've still got a ways to go in terms of competing with the good sides. I know it's tempting to be super frustrated and, really frustrated with the way that the last couple of games have gone, but I think, I try to be as balanced as possible, and I think looking at the positives and staying focused on those positives is more productive for me. We're seeing plenty from the kids. That's, I think, what we have to hang our hat on. We're seeing development in the younger kids. I'm really not that concerned by those 30-plus players, what they're bringing for us. It helps, no doubt, but it's not going to define our future. So if we're seeing development from players like Finn O'Sullivan, from Zane Dersma, who came back in today, which was I thought had a relatively promising game here. Obviously he's a bit of a question mark still. He's still not back to the way that he's been playing, but I say that even though he's top of the podium. So it probably speaks to the really high standard that he has set over the past couple of years. But yeah, I just think we have to stay the course. I always felt that the start of this season wasn't going to be super rosy, and I think we're seeing that now. We're still finding it a little bit tough to to stay in games. But I hope and I'm expecting that by the end of the year, we are able to compete for longer. And yeah, I think if we're not starting to see that by the end of this year, that's when, for me, alarm bells might start ringing. This is year 3 for Clarko now. Some would say it's year 2. I do think it's year 3 for him. And I'm expecting to see some growth, but I'm just not expecting it to be lightning fast, unfortunately. The last note here on the clipboard, it's probably just a bit of a watch on Tristan Xerri. I thought he was beaten again. Absolutely a really good ruckman, Jared Witt. So it's not alarm bells, but I think he's seemed a little bit sore to me, Tristan Xerri, to start the year. And just besides that really nice game against Max Gawn, I think he's just been a little bit below his usual standard. Just something to keep an eye on, I think, because we got used to a really high standard from him last year, and I wonder if he's a little bit too focused on the wrestling. I've got no doubt that other ruckmen are trying to engage him a little bit earlier. So I would just like to see him break the shackles a little bit, get back to taking a couple of marks around the ground. He'd take one intercept mark inside defensive 50 in this game, but we saw when he was at his best last year, he was able to do that a couple of times a game, or sneak forward and kick a goal or two. And we haven't necessarily seen him do enough of that this year, I don't think. Lost the hit-out count just in this game. So, look, just to watch for him. He hasn't been awful by any stretch, but I just would like to see a little bit of an uptick in his performance, because we know that he can do it. Last year, he was dominant. He's probably had a really strong argument for All-Australian ruckman last year. Off the first 5 games of the year, you probably wouldn't say that that's the case at this stage. So just a watch for him for the next couple of weeks, I think. Final segment around Arden Street, and no VFL to talk of or to speak of this week. I don't actually know, but I'm going to assume that they've decided to have a bye for Gather Round to, create a bit more want to go, make it the only football available or senior football available. So I have to imagine that's why there was no VFL to talk about, so I expect we'll get back to that next week. A couple of news pieces from the week. Luke Parker was reported by Tom Morris has been playing with broken ribs all year, which I don't want to say explains his level of performance, because I think he's been adequate. He's been very solid, but it does speak to his toughness. He's a bloody tough bloke, Luke Parker, and I don't think he's shirked any contests. I've never thought to myself, gee, is he playing injured? But it does start to, I think, make you realise, maybe he's been 1 or 2 ticks down from what we expect, and possibly that's because he's been playing under a little duress. So super tough effort by Luke Parker, and hopefully those ribs are relatively healed up or in the process of healing. You also hope that news coming out doesn't see him, get targeted. Not unfairly is the wrong word, but I guess, be extra targeted for a big tackle or a big bump where a player otherwise wouldn't be. It's that fine line between, if you step on the field, you're fit to play, versus going outside the rules. You think of that. It's a little bit different, but I think of Nick Riewoldt getting bullied by the Brisbane players trying to get to the bench. That is the difference. If you're trying to get to the bench, I think you have a right as a player to exit the play if you're not fit, whereas Parker has, deemed himself fit to play because he's out there. But I guess from my level of thinking, you just hope that this doesn't mean that he ends up being a bit of a target. Didn't see it in this game, so maybe it's not something to worry about too much. The major news from the week, though, that I've got no doubt everyone would be across, it was Luke Davies-Uniacke signing an extension, a 7-year deal. Big money. We know that in this game in AFL, the money isn't officially announced like it is in some other international sports, but there's some rumours around it being multi-million, and I've got no end there'd be a level of front ending on the deal because we've got the cap space right now, whereas you look forward 3 or 4 years, potentially we're trying to sign or re-sign really high draft picks that are going to need a lot of money, so you'd expect that there's been a bit of front ending happening. It's great for us, like super pleased that we've been able to secure him. Super happy for him that he's got this massive lifelong deal essentially. I do hope that we don't see any signs of him relaxing. There's a phenomenon more so in American sports of a contract year where a player just has a blinding year when they're coming out of contract to try and essentially get a bigger contract for their next one. And when we're talking about tens of millions of dollars in some American sports, it's a different pay bracket, different pay scale. I get that, but I think last year LDU had a really solid year. He had a really good pre-contract year. This year I thought he's been a little bit slower to start off with. He had a nice game on the weekend. I'm hoping that this has the kind of effect where he can now relax. He's not worried about the distraction of that contract. He's signed this a little earlier than I was expecting coming into the year. I'm super pleased about that. Gets rid of any, the Ben Mackay year when it was will he leave, won't he leave, that just hung around all year. It's nice to not have to worry about that for the entire year, and I hope it means that he can just focus on playing some good footy. So super good, super pleasing. We've got him signed long term alongside the likes of Sheezel, Simpkin, Larky. We've got I guess that core group that's going to take us forward for the next 5 years signed on. We just now need to start, like I mentioned before, seeing some actual on-field improvement. But I think the fact that he's chosen to sign does, speak positively to the environment that Clarko and Todd Viney and Jen Watt and Sonia Hood are creating down there. It's an environment where people do want to sign. You could mount an argument that we didn't even really want Ben Mackay to sign. It looked as though we weren't willing to offer him a deal that we essentially were dangling him for the extra draft pick. I think it's fair to say. But if you put him aside, everyone else has signed on long term. Cam Zurhaar re-signed, LDU. We've signed Larky and Sheezel, like I mentioned, to these long term deals. So people want to stay. They're committed to the medium and the long term, and hopefully that starts to be rewarded with some on-field success, because all these guys that are in their mid-20s, all they've known is losing the past 5 or 6 years. So hopefully we start to see some signs of improvement, and that faith is repaid. Looking ahead to the next game, it's coming up pretty quick. It's the Good Friday game against Carlton, 18th of April, 3:20 p.m, and just a massive game. Obviously, it's always a big day. It's fantastic that we've been able to hold on to this marquee game, particularly given we've been so bad over the past 4 or 5 years. It's a massive game for the Good Friday and the Royal Children's Hospital, but also with the Blues so out of form, it looks like Harry Mackay is unlikely to be available. I think he copped a concussion in the VFL last week. So we're a big chance. Carlton have just won their first game, but they only beat West Coast. They're not playing well. We're not playing fantastic, but it does loom as an opportunity. And the last couple of Good Friday games, I'm not going to say we've played well, but we've at least held our own for big periods of the game against Carlton. So hopefully we can do that again. I think the game's likely to be decided in contested ball. Both of our teams, I think you could say that's the strength of the midfield. Obviously they're led by Patrick Cripps in there as a really big bull in the middle, but he's ably supported by the likes of Sam Walsh as well. And we're definitely more inside midfielders than outside. We've got Sheezel, who's pretty good, but he's not a quick player. Someone like LDU and Jai Simpkin and Luke Parker, they're all in and under players that I think are in the best form for us. So I expect the game to be won there. If we can somewhat limit Charlie Curnow, I think we are a chance. Similar to the Melbourne game, you just hope that their stars don't get off the chain, because they still do have stars. They've got Jacob Wettering down back, who, Nick Larky has taken a liking to a couple of times, but he's a really nice player. I've mentioned Walsh and Cripps. De Koning's a pretty good player as well, and obviously Curnow up forward. So they do have some stars. If you can limit most of those stars, I think we're a chance. And yeah, hopefully it's a nice competitive game, because we know we've had so many uncompetitive Good Friday appeal games. I just would love for this to be, let's begin it with 5 or 10 minutes to go. I think that's the benchmark for me. We don't need to win. Obviously, it's great to win, but my expectations are set more around how long we can stay in the game and how well we're playing, as opposed to whether or not we're able to come away with the 4 points. So, look, hopefully we are. Hopefully it's a nice way to set up this week round of games. I think there is a Thursday night game beforehand, but Good Friday game, 3:20. I'm sure it'll be a full house for a massive game. And let's hope that we can have a more positive performance against the Blues on the weekend. Thank you so much for listening as always. I really appreciate it. And have a fantastic week. I hope to be speaking to you soon after the game rather than this couple of days delay. Should be able to watch this game live. So looking forward to reacting sooner, and speak to you soon. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.